Hi everyone, welcome to DeLonn's podcast. I'm DeLonn, and today we're going to be talking about death with dignity. Originally, this was going to be a group podcast. We were going to do a group panel kind of discussion, but unfortunately, due to COVID, my group can't be here, but that's okay. It's still going to be a lot of fun. I will give you a lot of information, and I'll include my links below just in case you want to look to see where I got any of my information from to fact check me, or if you want to kind of just like read over it yourself and see what you think about death with dignity and come up with your own opinion. So, death with dignity is essentially giving a person the autonomy to say, I don't want to go through what this terminal illness is going to put me through, and instead I want to go to a physician and get a medicine, and that medicine will essentially terminate the person's life. So Oregon was the first state to pass a PASS bill, so remember Physician Assisted Suicide Bill, and it's called the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. They did that back in 1997. And how their act works is it gives people with less than 6 months the ability to go in and request the medicine. I don't want to give the impression that you can kind of just go in and say, I don't want to go through this illness, I want to be given the medicine. There are actually a lot of boxes you have to check to be eligible. I'll use Oregon again for an example. So in Oregon, you have to be 18, you have to have a terminal illness that 2 doctors agree would end your life within 6 months, and you have to be capable of self-administering. So what that means is that your physician can give you the medicine, mom or dad or daughter can give you the medicine, you have to take it yourself. So there's no mercy killings. And how the process works in Oregon again is you have to submit 2 oral requests. Those oral requests have to be 15 days apart unless you're within 15 days of passing away, in which they could amend that. Once those requests are approved again by 2 physicians, you'll be given a prescription or written a prescription, and you have to wait 48 hours to pick up the prescription. Once you get the prescription and you take it, you'll pass away, like you'll kind of just fall asleep and pass away. Here's a fun fact I just kind of wanted to throw out there. Only 2/3 of people actually take their medication. So 1/3 of the people who receive it never actually take it. And this is just what I've been talking about kind of just in Oregon, but other states such as California, Colorado, DC, Hawaii, and a couple other states have also passed similar laws. So I wanted to give one example of a couple who went through death with dignity, just to kind of like make it real for everyone. So I wanted to talk about Charlie and Frankie Emerick of Oregon. They were married for 66 years, and they both were terminally ill. He had Parkinson's and she had a weakened heart. It's interesting because they actually did a documentary. It's called Living and Dying, A True Love Story. You can Google it, or I'll include a link below if you want to watch it. And they show their days, a couple days before death, a couple days prior to death. One thing interesting about it is they show that they had like a family event just 6 days prior. And I found this particularly interesting because they're in sound mind. I mean, he had Parkinson's, so his speech is a little choppy or delayed, but you could have a normal conversation, and their family sat with them and, said their final goodbyes. And that really raised an ethical question for me, because it's suicide, it's essentially suicide. But like I said, it's an interesting documentary if anyone wants to check it out. So I wanted to kind of talk about a couple things. First, I wanted to talk about the models that we discussed in class, both informative and interpretive, because I think these can both apply to death with dignity. First, the informative one applies a lot because it really is the most, it gives the patient the most autonomy, which I think that this is like the epitome of patient autonomy. And the doctor kind of just gives the patient the information that says, this is what's legal in your state, and if you check the boxes, here's the medication. And in that way, it's applicable to the informative, but it's also applicable to the interpretive if you think about it, because the patient does have their values, and the doctor can sit there and listen to why the patient wants to make the decision to go through with the physician-assisted suicide. The physician will listen and say, okay, this is what's legal in our state, and then can give them the steps to obtaining that medication. I just wanted to use those models because, like, let's say like a paternalistic model wouldn't be applicable to a death with dignity type of situation, because it really is looking at the patient's choice and patient autonomy. And before I get into the two bioethical principles of autonomy and non-maleficence, I wanted to talk about why people disagree with this so much. And one big thing I found, or interesting thing I thought, was looking at the classical Hippocratic Oath, which was one of the things that we read in the beginning of the bioethics class. And I want to just read a quote out of this, so excuse me for reading. It says, "I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody who asks for it, nor will I make a suggestion to this effect." And so when you see a lot of the organizations, particularly like a lot of the religious organizations that don't agree with things like abortion and not even newer, but I don't know, like more secular. I'm sorry if that's not the correct word. This is why. So what I just read, it was an outdated quote, but that same classical Hippocratic Oath also talks about the abortions, and those are two things that like more Christian or religious or traditional physicians wouldn't agree with. And that's a big reason that some physicians don't agree with this. Then I wanted to quickly hit on two bioethical principles that I kind of talked about earlier. One is autonomy. So when you look at death with dignity, to me, like I said earlier, it is the epitome of autonomy. It really tells the patient, like, this is what your path is going to be, and this is what we've seen in medicine, and where you're headed with your terminal illness. And it's giving the patient the right to say, no, I don't want to like lose my mental function. I know for me it was really interesting because my grandmother, who passed of Alzheimer's or dementia, people don't realize that when you have diseases like that, it's not like the forgetting that kills you in the sense of like memory. She literally died of starvation because she forgot to eat, and our family just didn't want to prolong putting her on a feeding tube and such. So I think this is very interesting when you look at it from a patient autonomy, just thinking of like what people with similar illnesses would have done if they were given a chance. And I also want to link this to non-maleficence, because I think this is a very interesting case of how these two principles kind of conflict in this instant. So non-maleficence, which says that a medical practitioner or physician should do no harm, and physician assisted suicide, we know that they are, essentially they're giving a patient the medication to end their lives. And I think that that principle has to kind of be amended or looked at from a different angle to say, yes, they are doing harm, but at the end of the day, they're helping the patient because they're not making the patient go through the pain that they would typically go through. So I just found that interesting when you compare autonomy and non-maleficence, because this is really a case where those two kind of butt heads for the physician, and then the physician kind of has to decide based on their own moral principles which side they're going to go on or which one means more. So I hope you learned something from this podcast. I kind of explained what death with dignity is. I talked about the Hippocratic Oath a little bit, and then I looked at some of the bioethical principles that we've discussed in class and kind of how they butt heads when it comes to death with dignity. So you come up with your own thought of it, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for checking out my podcast, guys.